welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
I am so excited to be with Andy Potter. Andy, do you want to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. I'm Andy Potter. I am, records. I'm a meta archivist. That's what I call myself these days. I have been in the profession for 35 years, 36 years, most of those, like 35 of them with the U.S. National Archives. And I've now sort of branched out. I don't know exactly what I do. I mean, I think consulting is somewhere around in there, but I like to think and I like to write. And I also am very deeply involved in a passion of mine, which is standards work, in particular TC 46 SC11.
Beautiful. And that's kind of where we're going to base our podcast on this today. But for the listeners, what does metadata archivist mean?
I pulled that out of the sky one day. I was looking for okay, what is the rest of my career going to be? I've always seen myself as an archivist, although I've done, that's what I trained as. It's how I came in. It was my title when I started my career. And now it's shifted. I mean, and throughout the career, it's shifted. I did a little bit of everything. You can name it in information management. I've done a little bit of everything. And so I was thinking, okay, so I've been an archivist that, meta. I can look at AI. I can look at other business process. So meta archivists seem to work.
Beautiful. I love that. So that's work. So who are you personally? Tell me a bit about you.
I live in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, happily working in my hayloft, which I converted. It's a 100-year-old barn. And that was one of the reasons I continued working after I retired, because I had to justify the money that I put into redoing. I mean, it's the office of my dreams. So,
Wow.
So if any of you ever catch me on screen there, I don't fuzz the screen out. I proudly show my workspace.
Wow.
On 3 acres in the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts, living with my wife and my golden retriever.
Love that. So the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur will now be hosted and broadcasted from your house. That sounds lovely. What is a hay barn? So for me, who live in England, that might be a thatched house with hay on the top of it. Is that correct?
This would be a hayloft where the farmer would store hay for the winter, and then, and in this case, it was a horse barn because they had a carriage. It's separated from the house, so they would throw hay down to the. And there was actually when we first got it, you could see where they had the coal stove back in the barn to keep the horse warm during the winter, because back when it was constructed, it was much colder in Western. We hadn't had a really cold winter in quite a while.
No, but that sounds amazing. So let's talk about standards. So we met at the Archives and Records Association. We met personally, didn't we, for the first time in August this year. We were part of a panel that was talking about the international standards. I was quite interested in your input and your actual experience around standards, which is what we've got here today. So can you just explain to the listeners what an international standard is and why should people care about them?
Sure. Well, a standard is, they're basically global guidebooks. It's experts coming across from professions, professional experts coming from around the world together to the same table to sort of determine vocabulary and principles, and then guiding products that allow practitioners to apply those principles within whichever sector. Now, in terms of TC 46, the 11, we're much like the profession itself. We're a horizontal. Our standards are applied horizontally across many sectors. In most cases in ISO, you will find they are sector-based. So there's a standard for everything. I mean, we're looking at an iPhone here, and there's probably a gazillion number of standards that are, guiding how the product, the pieces of that came together and were produced. The glass itself, the chips behind it, the software behind that. All of those have standards attached to them in some way. Almost everything you do in the modern world has an ISO standard somewhere behind it. And TC 46 SC is where the archives and records management were a subcommittee. SC11 is a subcommittee of TC 46, which is information and documentation. So if you have a library book and you see ISBN number. That's it's an ISO standard in 246. That's right across if you look at archival statistics, there's a subcommittee for archival and library statistics. So it's, I mean, obviously I speak passionately because it's become a passion of mine.
And I think your storytelling there is super important, because when you talk about those standards, do you feel that when you talk about ISBN numbers and talk about iPhones, that those companies or those organizations or those structures are actually using the standards to benefit the products that they are putting out there?
I think to a large degree they are, particularly in a sector-based. That way there's interoperability across the world. That was the whole purpose of ISO in the post-war, post-World War II. That was why it was created. It was to sort of create sort of this modern world that we're in, where there's interoperability. Like I can come to Australia from the United States and feel perfectly comfortable with every product I've run into so far. I mean, no one's thrown me a curve yet. And that's all based on international standards of one kind or another. It's not always ISO. There's other standards bodies.
So why is it so different in our industry?
Well, I mean, again, the principles are all there. It comes down to the ability to define. So you're suggesting that our industry doesn't use the standards.
So they're not embedded, are they, to utilize? So that's one of the key disconnects between the standards and practice.
I mean, I would say in it, you will see them increasingly built into systems. And that's partially with our management system standard, which is a 3301. And that sort of guides the, putting principles of 15489, which is the foundation standard. And it is principle based. So it's not like something you're going to be able to necessarily plug in. You kind of have to interpret it before it can get into a system or even, operationalized in an organization. So there has to be some interpretation. That's why we're records managers and information managers. We have to interpret those principles and be able to do it. Now, 3301 gives a framework for building that into systems, sort of records management by design, which increasingly, really, that's what has to happen. And, I'm seeing a real theme recently, but I've always felt it to be true, is that traditionally, as a profession, certainly when I came into the profession, we were counting on users to do the work: classification, capture of records, applying retention, putting them into buckets, if you will. And that might have worked, back in the day when I started. We had mail rooms. Organizations had mail rooms. Every bit of correspondence coming in got opened and categorized right there by people who you should actually train to do it, right? And that's changed completely now because of IT systems. That was the first thing to go when we got email and we got the servers with that convenient icon that just makes me cringe, which is a file folder. It's a file folder. So we're telling people, okay, put it into the file folder and it's filed, right? And the first thing to go was the mail room, and then we started, and then there was this whole period of time, and I think it's still going on, where we were training line staff, people who had other jobs to do. We were training them in records management. I remember I'd have a room full of people, and I would go, okay, well, here's the definition of a record. Here's what, and I see eyes glazing. I knew I'd lost a room when the eyes started rolling, and of course, particularly when I would be talking, there's a long period of time where we were to people print the file. Take your email. If you think it, print it and put it in a paper file. It's like, so 3301 gives us a way to take 15489, the principles behind it, and embed those into systems so that people can sort of hands off. And AI is going to do more of that.
Nice. So they're using it for systems, which is great, but are they using it within organizations to get buy-in, to, utilize those global standards for records management?
It depends on the information manager, and then it depends on the communication, being able to communicate as a community. That's why we have meetings like this and podcasts like yours, is to sort of grow that awareness that, if you need buy-in, here's a possible hook you can put your hat on. That's, to a degree, that's what the standards
So I'm going to tap into that. So what would be a good hook you could recommend to listeners to get the standards into an organization?
Wow.
Just
You're brutal. You're brutal.
No, but you've talked about engagement, you've talked about storytelling, you've talked about changing messaging. So one of the big things that we work on I certainly work on is information managers bringing their authentic selves, bringing the things that they're passionate in and linking it into records management so they can, sell it. And we are selling, we sell a service to the business to get buy-in.
Absolutely.
So how could you sell something to the business with the standards? Because actually, these are pretty cool. They're global standards. There's something that, you could utilize that, we could embed and we could just be excellence in our records management.
And I might be walking on thin ice here when I say I don't know if I would try to sell 15489 to the C-suite. I would.
You're taking my words literally now.
Yeah. But what I would do is if you look at the standards in SC11, every standard that's been published by SC11 in the last 25 years relates back to 15. It's all been built around 1549. So 1549 sits there as sort of the foundation for all. And then within that, you have, for instance, we published a standard on a technical report on using blockchain in the context of records management, along with the TC 307, which is the blockchain. So that was a joint working group that published this technical report. And there's looks like there's going to be a follow-on to that, more of a specification.
No.
You have cloud computing, which is a technical specification around implementing cloud computing within a records management environment. Now, that's very specific to a need within an organization. And if an organization is looking at doing it, it's one of the few places where you can find any really concrete guidance around that. Well, it was designed with 15489 at the forefront. So you look across the board, and we have work going on right now with a technical report for both. And what's interesting about that is right now they're looking at it as a two-part technical report, which is one part being for more of a horizontal approach where we say, okay, all these other sectors that are developing and building AI into their systems, here's what records management considerations are important to. I didn't mention risk. We have a risk management piece as well around records. You have that, and then the second one is if you're a records manager or a records management organization, here is how AI potentially could directly impact your operations.
Nice. So how do people find out all these standards?
Well, we do have a LinkedIn group, which is, I personally try to keep it up to date, but anybody's welcome to engage. I know my name shows up on it a lot. We're trying, we have a web page, a committee web page, and then there's the ISO online browser.
So, Andy, you've talked about where they can access the information on the ISO standards website. Sometimes for me, I'm dyslexic and I've got ADHD, and I find that website can be quite overwhelming. There's so much written text in there. How can people access digestible information around standards?
Well, a lot of it's, already incorporated. You'll find it incorporated in other products. I will admit, that is part of what I've sort of taken on as meta archivist, is trying to explain and making standards and the implementation of standard more understandable, more clear. Yes, there are. My example is I got first involved in standards before COVID. It was around 2018. I moved when I was working for the National Archives in the United States. I was moved to the policy and standards team. And we had the portfolio of supporting the American National Standards Institute and the National Institute of Standards in NISO in the United States, with being involved in TC 46 SC11. My first year, I was so at sea. I was like, wow. Even though I'd been involved in our implementation of 15489, because the National Archives was there at the very beginning, at the birth of 15489, and even before that, we were looking at and responding to Dirks coming out of Australia. So we were perfectly familiar with it, but the ISO nomenclature, the process, the bureaucracy, it can be very overwhelming, and so part of my arc with TC46SC11 over these years has been, okay, how can we make this more understandable? So, I mean, trying to use the website, trying to use our LinkedIn, admittedly, that's like a penny in the pond, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's, hopefully it has some ripples, but it's a penny in the pond. And you mentioned cost.
Because you have to pay for the standards.
You have to pay for the standards. I mean, it's generally anywhere between 50 and 150 euro, or actually Swiss franc, because they're in Geneva. For a corporation,
that's nothing.
That's nothing. For an individual, yes, but for an organization, it's just part of the, essentially, I would say, the price of doing business.
Yeah.
So we had, for instance, at the National Archives, we had a standards library that only our team and because we were using them. The United States federal government never adopted 15489
mm-hmm.
or any standard directly. But regulations, 36 Code of Federal Regulations, 1, 2, 3, God, boy.
My God, you keep all these numbers in your head, and I'm like, oh my God.
I used to. I mean, that one I've actually dropped, which is amazing. 1, 2, 3, 6. We never adopted it directly, but it is, there's a way what we call by reference.
Okay.
So it's incorporated by reference, and the languages, so basically the idea of that is the principle is there. The language of the regulation is specific to our organization. It's our language. Mm-hmm. But it addresses the principle, so that our records managers in federal agencies across the government can implement the Code of Federal Regulations. They're required to. I mean, there's a few shalls in there, but they're mostly musts. And they can feel, whether they know it or not, 1549 is somewhere buried in that. It's down in there,
And I think you just articulated my point so well when I said, start, why isn't it our industry like bringing the standards in and saying, these are this, and I think that's kind of a really useful description. One of the things I just want to pick up just before we end is that you've talked about up for interpretation. One of the things that I struggle with the standards is they're not helpful for neurodivergencies. So it'd be really helpful, certainly for me, to have them as like a policy on a page. So one image at the front, so that, you can really kind of captivate what that standard is about for like new people coming to the profession.
And I think, that more consistently, there are some TC, if you go to the, to the browsing platform, ISO OBP, each standard has its own page and it tells you how much it costs and where it is and how long it's been there. There's a whole bunch of information. And then there's a section for abstract. And there are some subcommittees and technical committees that are really great at writing abstracts. Nice. It is all, but it's not a central process. It's all depends on the culture of that committee to write those abstracts and to basically sell their product. And, one of the things that I've been trying to do with my deepening involvement in SC11, I have become much more attached to the committee than I was when I was with the National Archives, is getting in there and rewriting and expanding our abstracts to do exactly what you're talking about.
Nice. Well, this has been absolutely amazing. How can listeners reach out to you if they want to talk about more?
Sure. My email address is apotter@.com.
Nice. And we'll just put that in the show notes as well. So thank you, Andy, so much for your time. It's been absolutely brilliant. And now we can go and enjoy in the Aussie sun. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave and be beautiful.